Hey, good morning, everyone. Please rise for a moment of silence. Prayer and the pledge of allegiance. Oh God, thank you for the gift of this new day, and thank you for the blessings of this life. Today, we pray for peace in Syria and in Palestine. We pray for those innocent victims and for their families, and we pray for a speedy end to this vicious war. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
These proceedings are being recorded for the sole purpose of preparing accurate and independent recordings are overwritten following approval of the minutes, eliminating all unofficial records of these proceedings. The first item is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting held October 12th, 2023.
Motion approved. Second.
Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Hilton?
Show me as not voting since I was absent. Okay. Are there any deaths concerning county business at this time? If so, please state your name and your purpose.
It's me again. Brandon Vogel, local resident, and just here to keep you guys appraised of what we've been up to on the sewage sludge front. Basically, one of our members has met with folks, the administration in Bethlehem, and talking to them about what's happening with the sludge that they're producing, where it's going, and they seem so far very receptive. They weren't aware that it was getting, exactly what was happening with it, and the risks associated with it. So we've been talking to them about possibly ending their arrangement with that whole distribution process. And also we're starting a program where 95% of local farmers don't use sewage sludge. We're trying to start a program to recognize the farmers that don't use sewage sludge, produce a series of signs and flyers and stuff like that we can provide to them for no cost that announces that they are sludge free, and recognizes them for that. I think that was about all we had for our group today. Thank you.
Any other guests concerning county business? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Lee Uncle, otherwise known as Dan's wife. I live in East Bend Township, and I would like to publicly thank Linda Crispin and her group for their efforts. They're brave. They're being brave and bold in trying to take steps to protect the people of Carbon County, including farmers, to protect people's drinking water and their food source. I have been reading into EPA because that's brought up a lot, and EPA is on this. They are ready to take action. And I just want to do one quick thing. This is the PFA strategic roadmap, EPA's commitments to action 2021 to 2024. And this is one of their bullets. Their key action is this: educate the public about the risk of PFAS to help the public understand what PFAS are and how they are used and how they impact their health. And that is one of their commitments to action, and I think we're going to be hearing about. So again, I applaud Linda and her group. And I would like to give them a round of applause for their efforts. Thank you.
And I will make a comment about this. We understand that the company has denied having a public meeting with us. And I still stand on it. I mean, I'm a commissioner, a taxpayer, and I'm looking out for the safety for everyone. And I think one of the biggest concerns that people even bring up to me all the time is our $10 million bond that we have to preserve land. I'm looking at, are we going to preserve land that is going to be a future site that might not be of use for the county? And I think that the overwhelming amount of that people have done, and I just said it before, I mean, just because the state says it's okay, that doesn't mean it's right. And this statement, I think people commented about it in the paper. We're not tiptoeing through the tulips, we're walking through human shortage. And I mean, I'll let it go at that. And I'm hoping that next week we will have the resolution on the board to be discussed. I can't say it's going to be approved, but I'm hoping that it's going to be on the next week discussion. So thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Susan Fry. I live in East Penn Township also. As in reference to the meeting that Cinnabar won't be attending. When East Penn Township was originally fighting this, Cinnabar was there at the meetings. And I stood up and actually addressed the man. And I asked him what the 5% is that is not cleaned from the, during the cleaning process. And he just stood there and completely refused to answer me. I asked him a number of times. Finally, one of the supervisors said, he's not going to answer this. Well, no wonder they won't come over. They don't want to be amongst us, you know? Anyway,
If I could, I'd like to point out something in the letter, and I don't know, not reading it, correspondence yet, we just received it. Was the reason, regrettably, our decision is a result of incidents of vandalism and harassment that our clients have experienced following previous public meetings. And that's really unfortunate and it doesn't say much for those that are pro or against it. It's just not the American way, the way things should be done. Ladies and gentlemen, without any help, I'm up here. How many of you would like to see a landfill in your municipality? How many of you would like to see an incinerator in your municipality? You don't want it spread in the field. You have a dilemma, and I hope something happens, the EPA, et cetera, soon. And we're talking Jim Thorpe alone, over 325 or 50 tons. They just increased the agreement with people that dispose of their sewer. 350 plus tons per year at $125 a ton now. You know, we met with Cinnabar, and it's so unfortunate they are not going to meet because of the threats in that in society. But the problem is, what do we do to it? When are we going to run out of landfills? People don't want to incinerate it. They don't want it in the field. So we have a real dilemma on what we can really do. And I think that's our biggest problem in solving, how can we solve this issue to please everyone? What is going to make this better? That is our challenge to everyone. Come up with a good, solid method of disposing of this material safely.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
yeah.
I just have a question. Isn't this sludge coming from Bethel and Northampton and it's not ours? Isn't this their problem?
It's all our problems.
But isn't this,
Across the world,
where is the sludge coming from? Bethel? Northampton?
where this is,
Mhm.
these same, well, I don't know where all the municipalities, I know Jim Thorpe owns a landfill. And I think, I'm not sure which landfill, I didn't ask that question, unfortunately.
So
And
shouldn't
it-
we be responsible for our local? Shouldn't that be our local problem? Why are we taking on theirs? That's all I have
Well,
to
I
say.
agree, we have the same problem with the EPA, et cetera. And bringing fill in from New York when it's not good enough for them, when it's good enough for us. That's where I think the problem lies in our DEP and EPA has to come up with something better.
That's the official position of our group is that, yes, we don't necessarily want to see it, landfills, we don't necessarily want to see incinerators. However, we do need to come up with a solution. And currently the solution that's being enacted is the worst possible solution. Taking a pollutant and spreading it as far and wide as possible is much worse than putting it in one location where it is contained. And that's, so if we need to put it in a landfill, sure, it needs to go in a landfill. But taking it and giving it out for free as some sort of helpful product to people that will put it on their land is really just cost effective is what it is. And it's the most hazardous solution. I would much rather see it go into a landfill, which is still unfortunate, but all human activity has impact. We need to try to minimize that impact. And right now, what we're doing instead of minimizing the impact is minimizing the cost, the short-term financial cost. So yeah, obviously we don't want to see it in, a landfill, but much better that than taken and spread as far and wide as humanly possible, which is currently what's being done.
I don't want to get into this meeting. We do have other business today, so Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Serena Burlow from Palmerton and also with Save Carbon County. And the main reason of our purpose of our group is to educate people about what the implications are of these decisions. Because a lot of the decision makers, even when we went to the council meeting down in Bethlehem, those council people did not realize that their Bethlehem sewage sludge was being shipped up to Carbon County. And I agreed with the person who said, we should be responsible for our own sewage sludge and not allow other municipalities to think, oh, Carbon County's a poor county. They have all those empty spaces from mining or whatever up there. They won't mind if we come and bring our toxic waste to them. Let's face it, gentlemen, our main resource in this county for the future is the beauty of and pristine nature of our environment. And we are here to encourage you to please adopt a resolution that will allow us to have control over maintaining that. It is quite possible that in the future, as has happened in Maine, where they no longer can eat the wildlife that they hunt, they can no longer sell crops from certain fields because this sludge was put there. And they have problems with their groundwater being contaminated. We don't want that happening here in Carbon County. And while the legislation right now may say, oh, they can do that, they can spread this sludge. In the future, the farms that have done this may be faced with the fact that nothing grown on their land is going to be able to be sold for human or even animal consumption. Just once it gets into the food chain, we're all going to be suffering the effects. So we're all here. You see, there are quite a few people from our group here today. We're all here to beg you to please adopt a resolution that will give us control over this, and not just for the sake of economic gain or because it's free, accept what is coming here. We may not be able to do anything about what has happened up to this point, but going forward, please give our people control over this. And I hope that none of you live next to a farm where there's a field and you have your beautiful home out in the country and you have to smell what happens when this is spread out over our fields. So we're here begging you to hear us on this. Thank you.
Any other, yes, ma'am.
I'm Midge Heiser from Mahoning Township, and there is a solution. It's anaerobic something or other, and either Brandon or Linda can tell you what it is. It does cost, but that's the solution to this problem.
Are there any plans of building that type of facility?
There are, it's been in use in the country since the 1930s. The infrastructure bill is currently offering money to farmers to construct anaerobic digesters, which reduces the sludge by 30 to 70%, depending on the organic content of the sludge. And it kills PFAS.
Any other comments? Thank you for your comments. We all have a very large challenge ahead of us, when we're developing that type of facility. No one solution is the best, I think, that appears to be the best, but how do we get our state and federal government, the ones that really regulate things, to get off their butts and do something? You can't even elect anybody in there, to be the speaker of the house. It's pathetic. So I think we just need to work together, find a better solution. Whether this is the solution for now, I don't know. Okay. Okay, let's move on.
And the next item is the opening of bids for the sale of surplus county real estate.
No bids were received in the controller's office.
Thank you. Next item is the report of executive session staff,
There were none.
department reports. Executive transfer,
Second.
Mr. Honor?
Yeah.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
There are no supplemental appropriations. Expenditures approval of check numbers 239-191 through 239-82281 for expenditures to the general clearing account. Totaling $909,659.12.
Motion to. Second.
Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
The treasurer's report.
Move to accept. Second.
Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
Personnel report in county departments.
Move to approve. Second.
Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
The acknowledgements, the courts and row offices.
Motion acknowledged. Second.
Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
Correspondence was received as listed, copies will be made available to the press upon request. Adult probation for approval and execution. Submission of a grant application for fiscal year 2023-2024. to continue in county adult probation and parole grant. Previously named as a grant in aid for improvement of adult probation services through the reimbursement of eligible salaries for professional staff. Total revenue $60,635.
Motion to next week. Second.
Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
Advertising. Authorize the necessary advertisements relative to the 2024 Hardin County budget.
Move to approve. Second.
Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
Children and youth for approval and execution. Fiscal year 2023-2024 purchase of service agreements with the providers as listed below as per the attached rates. Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
The solicitor's report.
Thank you. Under the animal shelter, seeking a motion to approve a reduction in the price of the adoptions from $100 to $50 at the animal shelter for the month of November for veterans.
Move to approve. Second.
Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
And under the courts, seeking a motion for ratification of the acceptance of quotes from Gov Connection Incorporated in Merrimack, New Hampshire for 24/7 managed virus cyber threat detection and response through SentinelOne through a 1-year term at a cost of $7,697.56. Move to ratify. Thank you.
Mr. Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yeah.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
Nothing further for this week.
Any further business? Hearing none, commissioners report. Mr. Honor? Mr. Lukasevich?
Yeah, two items. First and foremost, this past weekend, Friday, we did implement Park by Text. Had 631 individuals use the Park by Text feature, which expands our ability to swiftly move people away from the kiosk and into downtown Jim Thorpe. That Park by Text comes in addition to being able to use the kiosks themselves and of course the Flowbird app. So I want to thank Butts Ticketing and our parking and maintenance staff for getting that up and running for Old Bowling. And the queues at the kiosk did seem anecdotally to be a little bit shorter because of that option. That's working out. I'd also like to read into the record the letter from Sinagro where they unfortunately had to decline our request for them to participate in a public meeting. And I have to state beforehand, though, they have been very generous with the Board of Commissioners, providing us their time and insight in the meeting we held with them. And likewise, I want to thank the Borough of Jim Thorpe and specifically Ed Gula, who manages the sewage treatment plant here, for the time that he's given us also to help us better understand the use of biosolids and the process that takes place really from the the residential and commercial up through the municipality to the actual spreading on the field. So it says, dear Carbon County Commissioners, in writing on behalf of Sinagro, to formally define our participation in the upcoming public meeting scheduled for October 31st concerning the beneficial reuse of biosolids. Regrettably, our decision is a result of incidents of vandalism and harassment that our clients have experienced following previous public meetings. We acknowledge the importance of open and constructive public dialogue. However, it is essential for us to prioritize the safety and well-being of our clients. The acts of vandalism that have occurred following previously public meetings have put our clients' safety at risk and have had a detrimental impact on their families' well-being. We have always been committed to fostering a peaceful and inclusive environment for productive discussions. It is with regret that we feel it necessary to decline our participation from the upcoming meeting due to these ongoing concerns. We hope that in the future, we can find a way to mitigate these security and safety issues and resume our participation in public meetings on the beneficial reuse of biosolids. Until then, we remain open to alternative methods of engagement that may help alleviate these concerns and allow for meaningful discussions. We appreciate your understanding on the matter and look forward to future opportunities for collaboration under more secure and peaceful conditions. That's all I have.
I have nothing further today, and we do have a retirement board meeting. We'll adjourn the first meeting at this time, and if anyone wanted to leave before we go into our retirement board, which we do about an hour or so. Media, so you're gonna be sticking around or? Okay, any questions by the meeting?
That letter, is that regarding a public meeting on October 31st?
Yeah, we had invited them to have a public meeting, so in the absence of that, we would not have,
Okay.
right, it was all dependent upon their availability. Like this.
Okay, and then, the connection, is that in regards because of the recent breach that happened? Is that why that you guys are doing that?
It's just upgrading our cyber protection.
Yeah, company. Yeah.
Yep.
And then, the budget next week. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Right. Everyone ready? Ready, Bart?
Yes.
You all can say it if you'd like.
I can't send public meeting without getting. Somebody has to happen.
Yeah,
I think we're ready. Okay, at this time, I'll call the monthly meeting of the retirement board to order. I'll turn the meeting over to controller Mark Zurchak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to everyone. First, I'll seek a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting held September 21st, 2023.
Second.
Mr. Zelinka?
Yes.
Mr. Zurchak, yes. Mr. Honor?
Yeah.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Notstein?
Yes.
Thank you. Any guests concerning retirement board business? Report of executive sessions, none were held. Next, I'll seek a motion to ratify the warrant for the following. Checks number 40984 to 40992 and direct deposit 7023598 to 7024012 for the month of September.
Second.
Mr. Zelinka?
Yeah, yes.
Mr. Zurchak, yes. Mr. Arner?
Yes.
Mr. Lukasevich?
Yes.
Mr. Notstein?
Yes.
Thank you. Next will be the retirement activity report for the month of September. We had 4 retirement refunds. And the disbursements for the month of September were monthly benefits totaling $482,512.41. refunds of $5,530.89 for a total disbursement of $488,043.30, leaving the portfolio value as of September 30th, 2023 of $81,872,966.99. And then the last update I have is as of last Friday, October 13th, 2023, their portfolio value was $824,469. So it'll change there, not much. Thank you. Any questions on that? All right, the next we're moving to correspondence. We actually do have a number of pieces of correspondence this month from our actuary, Corn Ferry. And the first one does need some action. It is a very modest fee increase on their professional actuarial services of about 1%, starting in January 1st of 2024. So I'll seek a motion to approve that.
Move to approve.
Second.
Mr. Zelinka,
Yes.
Mr. Spurcheck, yes, Mr. Arner, Mr. Lukasevich,
Yeah.
Mr. Notstein.
Yes.
Thank you. The next piece was the information that Sarah will also address in her presentation. In one of the last meetings, we were talking about looking at possibly reducing the investment return assumption from our current rate of 7.25% for the pension fund down to 7%. Even sometimes it's gone down to 6.75% based upon what's happening in the markets currently, and the forecast for longer term returns being lower than previous averages. So Corn Ferry did provide those scenarios that the board had asked for, and I did send those out to everyone. And I believe Sarah may talk a little bit about those when she speaks later. Any questions about that at this point? Thank you. The next, we received the annual information for the cost of living information from Corn Ferry. If a cost of living was granted for the Carbon County retirees. Has anyone have any questions on that? Thank you. And then the last thing, which is obviously for the budget for 2024, the ABC, which is short for actuarial determined contribution for 2024, was also provided to the board as well to keep our pension fund fully funded for the next year. Any questions on that?
We should just point out that the estimated actuary contribution for 2024 $1,430,000.
Yes, yeah, right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this year it was $1,238,302. So not a huge increase, but still an increase of one. Okay. Thank you. Solicitor's report. Thank you. And next, Sarah Wilson of Marquette is joining us to review the third quarter performance.
All right. Good morning. We have two things we're going to talk about, and I think that maybe what we'll do is we're going to go through the report, and then we'll come back to this, the asset allocation proposal. Remember, we did have an education on defensive equity, and that really ties into your ADC, it ties into where we think the markets are going, it ties into funding and everything else. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the quarter, because I think the quarter is really starting to be that telltale sign of where we kind of think this market is right now and where we think returns are going. So let's go to exhibit 2. So you're going to go down to exhibit 2, and you're going to go look at the US economy. I think we saw two different things that happened in this quarter. We ended up being a negative quarter, but we had some actually good things. Now, one thing is that we actually saw US economic likely accelerate, this page 10 in growth, with economists expecting real GDP growth of 3.6. Consumer spending was a notable tailwind, while strong business investment exports also drove economic activity. So while we kind of saw it kind of towards the end, so when we were in the third quarter, July and August, we had some good news. We saw consumer spending kind of go up, and even though things are getting so expensive. And then we also looked at, and you look below, look at that chart, total construction spending. When we saw total construction spending through August, for example, construction of manufacturing facilities was nearly 150% higher in normal terms than 2 years ago. So what we have seen, and you're going to see this bump, and you're going to talk about that. Remember, you have diversified into infrastructure, you've diversified into commercial, private real estate, not retail, not residential real estate. So we've actually seen some consumer spending into these places, manufacturing. Remember, though, a couple of years ago, before we did the rate hikes, a lot of companies went and kept a lot of cash on their books. They also were able to borrow at a very lower rate, so now they're kind of putting that in. Now you go and you look at where interest rates are, and we're going to go forward, that's not going to be the same thing. And this goes into, I think this is interesting on page 11. We talked about this, and we talked about the COVID. We always go back to COVID. We talked about household savings. Remember, a couple of years ago, we were talking about household savings, and the consumer was actually saving everything, so they didn't have anywhere to go. Well, now we started to see that go and it down. Look at how it's accelerated on consumer. So we're real household savings is pre-COVID level. So now we're starting to see the consumer doesn't have as much savings. We look at what's happened in home sales. Home sales in September are the lowest since they've been since the foreclosure crisis in 2010. So we kind of see home sales up, and we also look at the mortgage demand is the lowest since 1995, and I think that's a really interesting. We talked about that the last quarter, is that we've now seen the 25 to 30-year-olds who are usually not going and buying their own houses are now renting. It's a big rental property. That's why real estate, commercial real estate, has done so well. We also look at where rates are, and that the consumer, the younger consumer, does not have the 20% put down, the 10% for going to mom and dad. So we look at that and we see that. So now we've got spending that's going to happen. Well, that usually when there's no spending, inflation's starting to go down. So the Fed's a little bit happy about that. It's this horrible balancing there. So when we see that, we also look at small business hiring plans have weakened in recent months, which is consistent with a softening labor market and higher unemployment rates in the coming quarters. So now we've started to see that start hitting. And when we look at small companies, and this is going to go into talking about some of your performance, small corporations, the small caps have really struggled this year. Usually we like the small and mid cap companies, and they're usually doing better. In there, they have struggled and they are really struggling. Let's turn the page. We're going to go to page 12. We're going to talk a little bit about the global economy. I think this is very interesting. Look at the share of mortgages that are variable. Remember when we've seen all these rates go up, we've talked about the fact that that hasn't really affected the American consumer because 60% are locked into lower rates. Refinancing credit lines are a whole different story, but look at the global economy. Look at Australia on the share of mortgages that are variable. Variable rate mortgages by a much larger share of mortgages in many developed market economies, which leads a faster transition channel for higher interest rates to have an impact on consumer spending. So we are, remember, we're a global economy. We are going to start seeing that. And so as we were quietly raising our rates, not quietly, but we always think about, okay, how does this affect us at home? How does it affect us at the gas tank? You also have to remember everybody else is doing it as well. And that was going to have some economic there. And then look at shares of mortgages that are variable. Look how low the US is. And I think that really says something about that. Further, the typical term length for mortgages outside the US range from 2 to 10 years, generating a higher frequency of refinancing. So remember, 2008, we saw the refinancing. You sit down, you see mortgages, and you see foreclosures, and that becomes a real problem on there. We look at page 13, we look at the asset classes, global equities were treated in the third quarter and were raising interest rates, surging oil prices. US equities slightly outperformed the international developed counterparts, but slightly lagged emerging managers. US dollar strength played a key role during the third quarter. And look at the US, so the US equities were down 3.3. Trailing 12 months is 20.5%. That number is such a shocking number, because remember last year we were down double digits. So, but when you looked at that, there were just a couple of months within there. And this goes back to when we talked about what's really driving markets, and we talked about the top 7 stocks driving the markets up and driving the markets down. And you can really see that international activities were down 4%. US bonds were negative, and again, you can talk a little bit more about fixed income, and that's how that's been going to your asset allocation. Bank loans were up, high yield bonds were up, and then we look at commodities, and then global infrastructure was down 8%, US reached about 3.4. So we really started to see starting to go back into the red. Again, let's turn to page 14. And then we go look at the sector returns. So look, consumer discretionary down 4.5, consumer staples down 5.6. Look at energy up 12.9 for the trailing 12 months entry, it was up 29%. And then we go down and want you to go look at information technology. For the quarter, it's down 5.5. We know that, there's some political concerns about, chips, we've got, Taiwan, we've got China, we've got all of those. And that we also looked at, but it was up 37.3% for the trailing 12 months. And then we talk about valuation from a style perspective, and this also talks about how it ties into your performance. Value stocks top growth stocks by 0.1 percentage points in the third quarter. Last quarter, they underperformed growth. Value benefited from the outperformance of energy and financial. Year to date, however, growth has outperformed value by nearly 22 percentage points. So you can see that. And style and other factors return were genuinely muted in the third quarter as the market downdraft was broad-based. So year to date, however, large cap and growth stocks have dramatically outperformed the broad market, with the potential impact of artificial intelligence capturing investors' attention and driving gains in those areas. What does that mean? Please take a little bit of a value tilt. We know that through the course of years, when we look at a volatile market, values point of safety net. This market's been a very different market in the last, I would say, 18 to 24 months. Growth will outperform, and when we talk about that, so we talk about like 2%, but we always believe, and we're going to see in this performance, that in a down market, you want some protection there. So we look at so when we look at the average stock return after the end of the Fed rate, that's on page 15. Look at how we've seen that Fed rate. We look at the days since end of Fed hiking cycle. So we talk about the market, we talk about what's happened. The US market has largely followed the historical scope, and the S&P 500 is up at least 10% through June since 1950. So when we talk about what's happened seasonally, we also know next year's an election year. They see the major growth of it historically is the third year of a 4-year term. The third year, we're going to see the highest market growth, and then it's going to be flat. That's not happened in the last election. It's probably not going to happen in this election cycle because, we've got a lot of things. We've got the Israel crisis, we've got the Ukraine crisis that's still going. And then if we want to turn the page, we're going to talk a little bit about the Fed. So what's going on with the Fed? As we know, Powell speaks today, so the market's going to kind of sit there and see what he said. We know in September, the market, they held off, opted out, not to hike. Then, and then we know November 1st is what's going to happen if they do some interest rates. So the 10-year is at the cusp of hitting 5%, the 10-year treasury, the highest since 2007. We look at what's going on with the Fed. So the Fed raised rates 11 times to 5.25. When we talk about the Fed, they had 3 objections. raise rates to curb that inflation, consumer spending, they got that. Then what they wanted to do is they want to see inflation go down to 2%. Still not there yet, so we're gonna wonder what they're gonna do. We think they're probably gonna hold off this year, but there was probably gonna be, depending on data, 1 to 2 more hikes. We don't know when that's going to be, and then the market could turn around and saying that then they'll start lowering. Problem is they raised it too high. And the other thing that the market feels is when you look at the Fed is always kind of going backwards on data. So they're making their decision instead of going forward on data. So when they say, we want to do 2%, well, I can tell you probably everybody here has felt the cost of groceries going up, have felt the cost of gas going up, have looked at what's happened. We've seen especially in, cars have gone up. So, when you go to the consumer and you're saying, look, inflation still needs to go down, and you talk to the consumer's going to say, well, I'm feeling it. The major thing that's also happening is now we know student loans are coming back. The consumer has to pay for student loans, and it's now legal for credit cards to charge 29% on credit cards. Credit cards are up to the highest debt ever. This year came out this data. So we have now become, we looked at that graph that we're not saving anymore. Not only are we not saving anymore, we're also just spending. And we're also now not buying new homes. We're actually, what we're doing is we're renting. So it's a very different dynamic going into, fourth quarter and the next year. And I just I don't always mean to be down, but it's hard. I said this market's gonna be hard, and that kind of ties into your ADC. So let's turn to the exhibit 3 and look at where your portfolio is. And I think that kind of gives you a foundation. We'll look at where we are, that's page 22. So the market value was 81.9% for the third quarter. The portfolio was down 2%. 2.6%, outperforming the relative benchmark of negative 2.9. Did exactly what we wanted to do. Year to date, the fund returned 5.3 with a net investment gain of 4.3. So if we stop here and we don't look at what's going to happen in the next 2 months, we've seen a lot of volatility in this market. We know that you have not hit that assumed rate of return. We're at 5.3%. So if we were going to go there. For the trailing 3 years, the fund has annualized 5.3% with a benchmark of 5% with a net investment gain of 13.5. We look at outperformance by GWK, Dodge, and Cox. We talk about Artisan, Harding, Lowbird. Now, we talked about that. We'll go look at the performance kind of coming back. The manager came in. We had the whole portfolio team in last week. We met with them. They were in the office. Artisan has really struggled, but believe it or not, when we look at the performance, we say, well, they've underperformed the benchmark. They're actually in the top tier group. It is just a very hard time in that particular market for an active manager to outperform. We could sit there and say, we're going to put you in index. We have gone round and round at the OCIO committee. We feel that they have done long-term a very, very good job. It's just the environment they're in. If at any time that we thought that, remember we took you out of Wellington like in a day and put you in a fund. So we're still comfortable with that. Looking ahead, we're going to talk about the asset allocation, defensive equity, and actual rate of return. Let's go all the way to the end of the book. And let's talk about academics. So that's going to be on page 40. Right. So we looked at total month, total equity composite, week 40. We looked at it, we've done negative 3.2 versus 3.3. And year to date, you've done 8.7. We talked about GWK, so that's under your US equity composite. And you can see that it was down 3.8 versus 4.8. It's come back, and year to date at 2.4. So we're still seeing a lot of single digit returns in active managers. We look at your global composite was down 2.6 versus 3.4. Dodge and Cox, yet again, we put them in May 2020. That was one of the OCIO when you decided to do that. Down, up 0.6 versus down 1.8, year to date 11.6 versus 2.4, 1 year 26.4 versus 17. It's annualized 17%. And I want you to say, look at that. There are times when I'm going and looking at this, you just haven't had it that long, or dogs and cats. It's absolutely the other way. But when we look at these portfolios, we look at them 5, 7, 10 years out. We're not looking at 1 year, quarter. So we look at Artisan, which is just had an incredibly tough year, but it's tighter. You can see last quarter, they were off at like 500 basis points of benchmark. They tightened that. They're only off 70 basis points. Year to date, they still done 9%, underperformed the benchmark. Trailing 12 months is down 15. And then since inception, they're down 12 versus the benchmark of 7. We're not concerned as much with that. It's a flag. But when we go in and we look at what they're, and we go in and we look, remember, as I say, the Secret 7 are leading this market. Right now, it's a very, very hard global large stock growth market. So if we don't have those 7, and that's the higher way of doing that. And we're going to delve down into their holdings out there. MFS volatility has done very well for you. They were year to date 5.1 versus 1.2. Then we go to page 41. We talk about non-US equity composite. So that's just been a really tough there. We did put you into the Fidelity Emerging Markets Index Fund in June of 2023. We were down 3.7 versus 3.5 there. Then we go look at your real estate. Morgan Stanley has done, while it's in negative territory, has done a very nice job for you. And I think what we'll do is look, it's down 0.2 versus 2.2. Year to date, real estate's down 3.7 versus our index of 8.2. But when we go to the last tab, when we look at when we put them in October of 2008, you annualized 6.4% over 4.7. Remember, we funded real estate from fixed income and equities. So that was a nice diversification this board did. It's a little bit. Back, we know they had to readjust, so it's high interest rates. You know that was going to have an effect on commercial real estate. They kind of weathered the storm right now, but they still have nice dividends. And last year, they were up when everything else was down negative. So we actually redeemed and actually gone with you and deposited money from some of those earnings to help pay for all those benefits that go out there. Infrastructure with a good thing. We look at that year to date, 6.1%, and you can see it's a little bit under since you put that in January. It's just the time that you went in there versus the benchmark. If you turn the page, I think this is where we want to talk a little bit about. We go look at fixed income. So we think about where we did for real estate and how that's done. Infrastructure's been positive. Fixed income is struggling right now. Year to date, fixed income is down 0.80. The market, you're down 0.80. The policy index is down 1.2. So fixed income, you have to have it. Your pension fund. We talk about that, and that leads to diversifying into other things just because it's just not going to get the return there. Fair Core Plus Fund, we actually put them in last year. They've done well for you. They're only down 2.7 versus 3.2. Are there any questions? All right. What I want to do is I want to go back in and I want to take the page, go to the asset allocation proposal. I think this all ties in. Remember, we talked about defensive equity. We have looked at where we're looking at the returns and the proposal of it. Your currently target return is at 7.25. There's a lot of dynamics in lowering that. I can always say you need to lower it, you need to lower it. I also know that you need to, as a county, figure out how you're gonna pay for it. It's an expensive thing to do. I think that one thing that we understand, and I do this with all my county clients, is that they try and lower it, and some are able to do that. And then they get this great the ADC goes up and they're not reading their ADC, it's why we look at all the dynamics in here. This pension fund's gonna be here a long time after all of us are here. Meaning we need to make decisions that aren't a year decision, aren't a 3-year decision, but it's looking at a 10, 15, 20-year. How do you keep this funded down the road? So when we look at the target return of 7.25, currently, your current asset allocation proposal. Remember, this can look very different depending on when we snap the market, but we're just looking at it now. We did this when we did that education defensive equity. Your annualized returns at 6.95, but your volatility is at 11.62. When we look at volatility, when you added a lot of these money to scenarios, you really did take down your volatility. We look at, so how do we take out some of that volatility? It's not always about looking at exactly what the return is. I think it's very important. We also want to take out volatility in the portfolio, because when you've got double-digit balance years, remember that affects you. The actuary doesn't look at your tenure, and they do, but they're going to snapshot you every year to make sure what your ABC is going to go up or where it is, where you're funding it. So we talked about that. Remember, we did the defensive equity education. We talked about putting 5% in that. That's a risk premium, what it is, its manager is making its parametrics, which we would use, and they actually do the overlay of the options, meaning they own the S&P 500 stocks, they own the US Treasuries, and then they determine where the market's going to go by buying the options and taking that small, slight risk premium. You're not having a hedge fund, it's traded account, it's not, you're not owning the hedge funds, it's just the manager that does that activity. And by doing that, portfolio A takes you down about 3%, 6.92, but it adjusts your volatility about 74, 75%. So we're really taking some of that volatility out. Portfolio B, and I think we could do this in 2 steps. We talked about that. Remember, asset allocation belongs to you. I can advise you that the asset allocation is your decision. It's what you're comfortable with. We pick the managers, we do that, but the asset allocation is for you. Portfolio B would be upping your fixed income by 5%. And that takes down the annualized 10-year return to 6.79, but takes volatility down about over 150. So those are the 2 decisions. Your other decision I know is that you have to understand where you're going to do your target. You're going to keep your target rate of return of 7.25 for next year. If that's what you're going to do, then I would probably suggest one. I would probably go to portfolio A and then revisit again the portfolio B. Whereas I would love to see fixed income safer and everything like that. But I think if you're going to keep it at 7.25, then you need something to try and kind of drive that off of. So that's the 2 things that you need to decide.
And I think we did talk about that before, take a little step and then you do the rest of it, like in 6 months or whatever you see me doing. I think
Right.
that might be the best way to do it.
Yeah, because I
I
think if you look at portfolio A versus what we have, the county has now, it's not a tremendous difference in the estimated annualized return, number one. But it does reduce volatility, and then you get the defensive equity exposure of 5%. So I mean, that's, and I believe Sarah, you had mentioned your company has recommended that to many other counties as well.
You're going to look like a lot of our other counties. We just do the education. And remember that you did change to OCIO during COVID, kind of in lockdown and education. Then we had to go do all the education on infrastructure and stuff. Defensive equity at that point is kind of step back a little bit, just because of where it was. It's done very, very well. It's long term, 5%. 6%. That's what, in this environment. I can tell you that depending on the market, and I can tell you what I think the market's going to do. Then I'd be buying options. But I really think, and we said again, I think we're in for some really tough years. That being said, keeping it at 7.25, I just advise you, that's gonna be a lot harder to hit. I understand the other side of it, you've gotta pay for that. So that's why I would say, and fixed income, we all thought, 10 years ago. 35-40% fixed income, where it used to be 50%, it's nice to say. It's not anymore. I think let's revisit this, and I would suggest revisiting this, probably at the end of next quarter. And I don't like to be market time on that. I think portfolio is going to do that. If you're gonna leave it at 7.25, I think you're probably good for that. And you can always revisit the ABC. And I would urge you in the next year or two, eventually that's gonna have to come down. And make plans for that.
So I think in Corn Ferry's forecast, they said it would go about 300,000 more to go down to 7% even from 7.25. If we change that now,
Right.
but you're recommending that we start the defensive equity sooner rather than later, I believe. huh?
See, my recommend, well, it's your asset allocation, so if you were going to do it, I would say from all the education, how we felt this would probably portfolio A. With, and we would recommend putting 5% into defensive equity, if we were comfortable with that.
My first question is anyone interested in getting changing the target?
The 7,
You haven't have anything, is there anyone interested? What constraints are, budgetary wise,
Right. Right, I know the budget's tight, right?
that's the problem.
My thinking would be first to look at portfolio A, adding defensive equity.
Yeah.
I mean, either way, whether you would lower the rate of return, and tell me if I'm wrong, Sarah, sooner rather than later, either way, it's gonna affect the ADC because you're not hitting your target, or you lowered it to hit the target. So either way, right?
Here's what's gonna happen. I could say the longer you put off lowering the ADC, it's gonna cost you more down the road. I understand, the needs are trying to meet that. I think the sooner you lower that ADC, the better, but I've said that every year, so, and I understand the dynamic of, next year, if you come up with another down year off of last year, you had some nice returns the year before, and you've done well. You come off of another down year or a flat year, you don't hit that 7.25 in 2 years, and then we go and look at what's gonna happen next year. Eventually, your ADC is gonna get, your required contribution is gonna get out of control.
How do you think the more that escalates the market?
Or, I remember being here last week, remember you on that meeting, it's so going on, never even possible. In some ways, we look at it and that's just, I was saying, if you look at how that affected the market, we look at, oil's not gonna really affect it. It depends on who steps in, it depends on if we go to war. It's also gonna depend on a lot of policy, where they think who's gonna get in as president. I think about a lot of variables. I think the one variable that we have yet to see, and this is what I've been saying, is I think about the American consumer, this is finally gonna catch up to them. And then you're gonna see higher gasoline prices, you're gonna see these interest rates. And then all of a sudden, the Fed's gonna probably turn around and start lowering rates again, we don't know, eventually they're gonna do that. There's gonna be a point in time where it is gonna affect it. War in Israel is an uncertainty with Israel and Palestine. I was thinking when that happened last week, when they talked about what we thought the market would, start going down, the market actually hasn't reacted as volatility. as I suspect, there, I think we're gonna look at what's really gonna start affecting you is when we look at seeing what we're going to stop. And what those look like, what unemployment looks like, what inflation is going to look like, and then what happens with all these refinances, the student loans are now back. So I think that's got more of a domestic effect. But you're gonna see the number of global economy, unless something horrific happens in the Middle East. I think we're gonna see volatile days with volatile news. It's hard, it's really hard, it's so hard, I mean, I just thought, I tell you, I thought the Ukraine war was gonna really do a lot. To the market,
Well, oil fluctuates no matter if there's a war or not.
yeah,
It's like one of those things.
and you're not actually, do you remember when oil went to like $3? And we were all just, you know, it's over $4. We've almost come used to it.
Yeah, when the lower dollar.
Wage growth is gonna be an interesting. Once we start seeing the labor market soften, and we look at wage growth and we see that trying to keep up with the inflation, I think that's gonna have some effect.
That's also gonna affect our contribution as well for the county level things that we work, so.
Year to date, just so you know, Wayne, year to date, you've taken out $5.6 million. You've put in two. So year to date from 9/30, your net cash flow is 3.6. And you did have a gain of 4.3 net investment. So we kind of kept up with it year to date as much as possible. Even with the quarter being down 2.6, so you've got a lot going on.
What maybe I would propose is taking baby steps and dropping it to 7.2%, you know, high for that.
I don't know if you can.
Can you do that?
I don't know if it could be. I don't know how much of an effect that would have, 5 basis points.
Well, so we think about that then until next month, we think you see, then we are,
So, you know
we
what,
have to quarter of percent, so.
you usually go for the potential, you can drop your agency at any time. There's that, you know, we can talk about it next,
You mean your rate of return?
you're ready to
Yeah.
work, right? I can do that, it's just preparing for next year, it always comes up this year because it's budgets. So, you know, we kind of, you know, the actuary says, you know, let's look at it. I would suggest. Probably that's a conversation outside of here too, looking at what you can and cannot afford. I would suggest probably doing the asset allocation proposal today. Talk about the ADC, look at where it is on there, and then, we can have Marion, I can probably talk to you, discuss it, if we want to do it that way.
I mean, we know,
That's the thought.
right, I mean, we know now what the financial impact is if we did, it's about 300,000, so. Yeah, right. So do I need to amend the agenda, Mr. Solicitor, to make a motion on something that wasn't on the agenda?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
I'll make the motion, and then, I mean,
I'll second
right, right. Oh, no. Good question.
I'm sorry, any questions? Mr. Zelinka,
Yes.
Mr. Sparchak, yes, Mr. Arner, Mr. Lukasevich,
No, it's not a unanimous decision.
Mr. Notstein. Explain that.
I'm amending the agenda to opt the targeted.
No, I meant,
Portfolio,
Yeah,
it's gonna impact returns. It is going to impact returns. It's not $100, it's not $200, it's not a couple thousand, it could be tens of thousands. That is not a de minimis action. Right? So actually modifying that agenda for that motion, I would say violates the restrictions we're under when it comes to what modifications can be made. I think it's important. I
Right.
don't think it's appropriate to make it at this time. But again, I'll defer to the solicitor if he defines the potential impact of this is de minimis or not.
Bonnie, that's not a great statement. I mean, obviously.
It's something, with that being said, I will withdraw my motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Emily, you shouldn't have wrote that this morning. It was hard. That was your.
So next month,
Yeah,
okay.
Put it on for next month.
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
for the asset allocation changes.
Yes.
Right, okay. All right, thank you.
Are we comfortable with the asset allocation changes? Do you want to learn more about it, or do you take more?
I'm comfortable.
It looks good.
Okay, so it's more of the agenda and everything else, it's not this, because I was gonna say I could do something more education or whatever.
No, I think even, I mean, and I'm just going back to the lesson you gave, because I mean, I just got the feeling from everybody that portfolio A would be the way for other people. Second, so,
Yeah,
you know,
I think that's a reasonable change.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay, good.
okay.
Well, put it on for next month.
And,
Right,
you know, I know that it is a very difficult challenge, and so, you know, and we're trying our best, and that's why I think we've done a great job. And I think it's, as a board, we've done a lot of things on the asphalt. We've done that with CIO, we've really done a lot of work, so, it's a struggle, but you've really put this portfolio in a much better position than it was 4 years ago, so. That, and I always think to me, they're like gloom and doom, but I think it's better for you to say, you know, the market's gonna be great this year, and, you know, we're hoping, and remember, at the beginning of this year, I said if we end up flat, we'd be happy with that, so we're a low return, so I think that's what we're heading for.
thank you, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah at this point? All right, then we'll move next to any new business for the retirement board. Any old business? Anything under further business? That's it, Mr. Chairman?
There you go, further business, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Question by the media.
They're